Good morning and welcome to this lecture. My name is Ibrahim Labaran Ali. The title of the lecture is Strategies for Building Supply Chain Resilience. So firstly, let me start by asking, I believe we must have experienced one form of disruption or the other during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, a situation where we go to the shop, for instance, we can't find the item which we want or place an order, the order never comes or comes late. So the whole essence of this lecture is we want to have supply chain resilience where we always have product or service availability anytime, no matter the type of disruption. We want to have a situation where there is always product availability or service availability. So the learning outcomes is firstly to understand the concept of supply chain resilience, evaluate the importance, and also demonstrate understanding of strategies for developing a resilient supply chain. So firstly, supply chain management. Supply chain management is all about managing the three flows, which is the funds, materials, and information from the supplier to the producer and finally to the customer. And in the end, we want to have supply chain surplus. Supply chain surplus is when the cost of providing the services or the product is less than the revenue which we get from generating or from providing that services. So there will always be challenges. There's always going to be event that's going to disrupt the supply chain, which we call supply chain risks. So it's the likelihood for an event to adversely affect the supply chain operations. So for instance, COVID-19. COVID-19 is a recent supply chain risk event that has disrupted lots of supply chains. We all experience it. For instance, we have Brexit, and currently we're having the Ukraine war, which is disrupting a lot of supply chain. We have wheat prices going up, we have energy prices. So these are risk events. So we want to have a resilient supply chain where even when these events occur, for instance, COVID or the Ukraine war, we want to have a situation where the product is always going to be available. By doing that, we have what we call supply chain resilience. Supply chain resilience is the ability to anticipate for a disaster and prepare for the disaster and respond in such a way that even after the disaster, we either have the same situation before the disaster or we emerge stronger after the disaster. And the main importance of supply chain resilience is product or service availability. We want to constantly have available products or services. Also, it's important, the resilience help for proactive response. We'll be able to respond to disasters before time, and also collaborations. Resilience help us to collaborate between our supply chain partners, and resilience, supply chain resilience help us to have visibility across supply chain networks. And importantly, resilience also help innovation. So for instance, Brewdog, which was a beer manufacturing company during the pandemic, Brewdog innovated and started producing hand gels, which was a very critical and important product during the COVID-19 pandemic. Strategies for developing supply chain resilience. I'm going to discuss four key strategies, which is redundancy, flexibility, agility, and culture. So the first supply chain resilience strategy is increasing redundancy. And one of these strategies is holding inventory. And I know as master student, you must have heard that inventory is bad, inventory is expensive, don't hold inventory. However, during disruption, you easily run out of inventory. So as a supply chain resilience strategy, we want to have extra inventory so that even if our suppliers can supply us, we should have inventory to continue delivering our product or services. And also, as a redundant strategy, is we could maintain low capacity utilization. And another critical redundancy strategy for supply chain resilience is to have multiple suppliers. So for instance, if you have just one supplier and the supplier is in Ukraine, during this war right now, your supply chain is going to be disrupted. So we want to have multiple suppliers. You see, you could have a supplier, in Europe, for instance. You could have one in Asia, so that during disruptions, you could have continuous flow of product. The second resilience strategy is flexibility. Flexibility is the ability to easily adjust to changes in production levels. We want to build flexibility so that we could quickly respond to changes in demand. Flexibility in terms of having raw materials, and we also want to have flexibility in our transport capacity. The third supply chain resilience strategy is building agility. Agility is the ability to quickly adjust the supply chain strategy before or during disruption. So that means we have to be alert. And one strategy we could do to build agility is, instead of having just one warehouse, say up north in Glasgow, we can decide that, okay, let's have three warehouses. So if there's a disruption in, say, our warehouse in Glasgow, we could have another warehouse in Manchester that could able to deliver product to our customers up north, for instance. Another strategy is we can decide to outsource the whole of our logistics operations. So in order to mitigate supply chain disruptions, and we can say, okay, let DHL or UPS be in charge of our logistics operation so that we can have an agile supply chain. The fourth supply chain resilience strategy is building or changing corporate culture and risk management culture. So we want to have continuous communication between, say, the management and the employees. So the employees should be fully aware that there's a disruption or there's a disruption coming, and this is what they should do. And it's possible, it's critical that there should be some sort of scenario or role playing to condition for risk management. And also it's very critical to empower employees to take necessary action, because it's very possible that at the climax of risk event or a disruption, that employees cannot get access to their boss. So for instance, we have, say, a store manager of, say, Tesco, for instance, in Glasgow, and there's a disruption, they can't get access to their boss. We want to have a risk management culture that that employee or that store manager can make critical decision that is going to mitigate the disruption at that point in time. Lastly, there has to be continuous monitoring. We have to continuous monitoring the total supply chain structure. It's also critical to keep our ears on the ground, monitor the news, the social media feeds. Most times when these disruptions occur, the first avenue, the first source of information comes from the news or the social media feeds. So you want to have continuous monitoring. Your whole employee should always be keep their ears on the ground to know if to be aware of any disruptive events. In summary, supply chain will always be exposed to different types of risk. Firms must always be prepared for disruption by building a resilient supply chain. Supply chain resilience is not cheap. However, disruption is more expensive. Supply chain resilience is critical for organizational survival and also for competitive advantage. These are some available readings. And lastly, I want to close by these two quotes. One by Michael Orr, which says, good risk management fosters vigilance in terms of calm and instills discipline in terms of crisis. And like David Waters says, supply chain is like nature. It's all around us. Thank you very much. Any question, please?